Hello everyone, thanks for being here. I'm going to start my computer a lot, sorry about that. So let's start. My name is Pavel, I work at evolutiongaming.com as a JavaScript developer at Platform team, where we develop live casino games. So if you have heard about live casino games, then you must probably have heard at least about one of our clients. We provide B2B solution that allows casinos to integrate our live casino game in their platform so that they can be authenticated in our games and their actual balances will be shown and all the money will flow in the right direction. And in the last couple of years, we managed to migrate away or migrate to certain technologies. So I'm going to tell you a couple of very personal stories about dealing with modern, in its time, JavaScript. So I have to give you more context. So these are JavaScript developers in Riga, because our headquarters in Riga. These are JavaScript developers who work at Evolution Gaming, and these are JavaScript developers who were interviewed for Evolution. Since we provide live streaming casino, we apparently provide live stream across all the devices, even the slowest ones, so we care about performance a lot. And as many other product companies, we care about everything. We can't outsource a single part of our application. We can't hire junior developers. And we have self-sustaining teams that work on different games. They work on front-end, back-end. We have, on front-end side, we have Flash and HTML for desktop as well as mobile. So we also work on 3D games using WebGL, Babylon.js. So let me tell you the story. First, Frontend department was established and set in 2012, and by the year 2015 we had 10 developers and around 4 games. And after that we started to grow explosively, so that's why we had to reconsider existing architecture. So by that time we had a couple of problems. Like we had problems with our CSS, we had problems with our build tool because we were using Ant, and our architecture we had the architecture that didn't really scale. So by messy CSS, I mean when you have a lot of CSS where cascades are used extensively and no one gives a shit about the structure because you don't have any. And when you're fixing a bug, instead of looking for a line that might be a reason for this bug, you just put a hook in a random place because everything is so tangled and you're so afraid to break anything. And after a while, your whole CSS picture started to look like just a set of hooks. So we had a problem with Ant. Not sure if it's a problem. We started to use it because we had JavaScript background, our first developers in our department. And it was slow because we used to execute Google Closure compiler, and even in parallel, it takes a lot of time. And it was very unnatural for JavaScript developers. And after all, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. Anyway, we didn't like it. When it comes to architecture, we were using Backbone, pretty standard one. It was industry standard back then. It was good, but it was a bit hard to build scalable architecture on that. So actions are mutable, that's obvious. For MVC, everything is about mutating the state. And every new developer that was joining our company revealed a problem with dealing with Backbone in a huge application. Events are mutable as well. No surprises, it's JavaScript, but one day you may want to add a little extra to the event so that the next event might know something more about what's gonna happen. And you end up having listeners with priorities. And then after a while you add listener with priority -999 because a year ago you already added the top priority listener with priority 1, but then you needed one more priority. And one day you might implement patch update because Backbone advises to re-render everything, but it is slow. On slow devices, it won't work. So once you started to implement patch updates, it's going to be a problem because it's fragile and it's really hard to test. So that's how we felt about Backbone at our scale. It just won't work poorly. Anyway, it was 2015, so the React bus has finally caught up with crowds. And that was our break in the cloud. So we decided to try React. Ideas behind React seemed straight and simple. And in 2015, like, you had to use React, right? We started to create reusable components. It was nice and shiny, and abstraction was really good. Though it was costly, it consumes more memory and CPU rather than like if you wisely use Backbone. And it turns out to be just, sorry, It turns out to be just a Vue library, but we need something for state management. And again, 2015, we had no choice because, well, everyone was using Redux, and so we decided to use. But again, when it comes to real life, and you have to deal with the side effects, you have to choose Redux Thunk, which is whatever, just put your side effect code in a function and call it. Or Redux Saga, which is pretty the same idea, but instead you have a bit tooling and go to a like syntax. Or you can do it in a middleware, and all the approaches were valid at the time. So whatever, millions of people can be wrong. We decided to go with Redux. But enough about that. Gulp. Remember the days when we needed a build system, when we had auto prefixer, CoffeeScript, and we were so tired about 1,000 lines grunt files because they were boring. Instead of executing tasks one by one, we had Gulp, where we can pipe the execution. It sounds very efficient, and Gulp seemed a way to go after all. But Gulp is about streaming, not building, so we end up having dozens dependencies like Gulp shell, Gulp rename, and even Gulp if, which for me seems the opposite of streaming system. Anyway, after all, our Gulp file was around 1,000 lines and it was unreadable. Next, types. Apparently we need types, and we had to make complicated choice between Flow and TypeScript. Flow has more powerful type system by design, but TypeScript is more or less mature, was back then, and still, and had more definition files, and frankly the fact that Anders Heilsberg stays behind this meant a lot for us. But 2 years back, very important argument was, how easy is that to integrate into your system? And even more, except of Bubble, we had Webpack. We even considered switching to Flow just because of the problem with configuration. Flow was easily integrated to Bubble, just turn one plugin on and that's it. But this TSC wasn't so efficient, so we were using TypeScript compiler in order to just remove types and validate them, and then we were passing files to Bubble again. It was tough. Anyway, nevertheless, all the problems, we had reusable component, and it was already good for us, and we felt ready to split our code. And someone told us at ReactiveConf 2 years ago that they use private NPM. It is very convenient and helps a lot. So we decided to try, because you also have a manager that does all the job for you. And also it plays well with multiple repositories, because we have multiple teams that could have multiple repositories, and they can care about their own code. And they become self-sufficient. And it does work well if your dependency tree looks like this. Even in more complicated cases, when you have entry point and couple of dependencies on the same level, it still works well. But in our case, and probably in most of the companies, the dependency tree looks like this, because every team has its own repository and its own package, and there are utils, translation, components, video components, and sometimes you try to deliver changes from down-level components to the up-level components. And it takes you like 5 to 10 merge requests, and while you're merging them, your build constantly read. So it was like the opposite of what we expected. And when we found out ourselves in a state of broken delivery, first we merged everything back to mono repository, and that we got our history navigation back, and we were able to make major changes in one commit. But the problem was still here. The packages wasn't aware about existing of each other in a file system. And here where Lerna comes into stage. But the problem with Lerna is once you need to release something, you have to release everything. Even in a case when you have to backport certain commit to certain version, you still have to release everything, which doesn't make a lot of sense for us, so we decided to not use Lerna. We just directly referenced all the packages in the file system using TypeScript config or Webpack config. And also, I think the problem is a bit in the somewhere. Idea is very straight, like you have major version, minor, and patch. Whenever you change API, you release major version. But in real life, in our SaaS world, and especially if you have A/B testing where you could have 2 versions of application that are equally valid and exist in parallel, there is no semantics for somewhere. So we spend a lot of time breaking and fixing our workflow, but the question is, how did we ever fall into that? You know the guy? That is Midas. He just turned his own daughter into gold. Imagine how upset he is. And that is JavaScript developer, let's say me. And sometimes I feel myself like he. There are hundreds of buzzwords that are already dead, and everything in our world is either hateful or beloved. We had a story with Backbone. When we introduced it, we liked it a lot. It helped us. We were using prototypal inheritance. We were even using multiple inheritance in JavaScript, and we liked how Backbone was solving our problem, but it just stopped scaling at certain size, at certain application size. We had CoffeeScript because developers like how elegant it is. They like classes, they like arrows, they like list generators, and overall it was more functional, like everything is expression. Isn't it great? Remember the guy from the first slide? Yeah, we have experienced fatigue at the time. But we know the recipe. In order to cure it, you have to think about your experience, recap, and analyze it. So let's compare. We know for sure that React is slower than Backbone if you use Backbone wisely. At the same time, React is faster than Backbone because you can provide reusable components. Redux Sync is way better than Redux Saga because you know why? Because Dan Abramov created it. And vice versa. Redux Saga is worse than Redux Sync is worse than Redux Saga. But the thing here is none of this actually true. And it is fine, as long as you have control over your code base. There are hundreds of questions with no answer. We can argue about NPM versus Yarn for years, but it's never gonna end. So our recipe is just to keep calm and stop worrying about problems you never had, and be critical and make sure you actually solve the problem. And there are actually some instruments that help us a lot. Like React Lifecycle is good. We never had problems with it because it reflects well what is happening. And there are also alternatives with the same API if you may get tired of React. That's what we usually JavaScript developers do. There is Preact or React-like, React Lite. We like TypeScript a lot because it has good tooling. There is TypeScript language service, which you may use. We use wrapper over it. So we execute parts of our application, or we ignore certain errors if we import code from third party, which has different rules. It gives us less runtime errors, and it has been proven when we were migrating to TypeScript, we managed to find a couple of small problems that were reported to Sentry, but we never were able to reproduce them. We just found them by adding types. And the good thing for us, we don't need bubble anymore. We've got rid of it. And no one actually noticed this in the company because TypeScript compiler compiles to down-level JavaScript with no problems. And you always can make type definition stricter, which means whatever, whenever you want, you can just redefine backbone. That's what we do, or underscore and make it stricter so that harder to break. And TypeScript is getting better. That's apparently from version to version. CSS modules are just useful. There is no reason to not use them. And it not necessarily has to be CSS modules. That could be anything that isolates your component styles. Monorepo is a thing actually we have strong opinion about. I still see articles that starts like create a new repository at GitHub, but I think you shouldn't do this unless you have a microservices architecture or you understand well what's going to happen next. Because for me, there is no difference between for me, separate repositories is not any better than separate directories under one Git, because this little friend, I mean 2 dashes, can narrow down all the Git commands to the certain directory. And it also works with graphical interface apps. And what's most important, we keep our process fun. We focus on problems rather than solutions. You may recall hammock-driven development by Rich Hickey. Without everything. And we try to stop GitHub star-driven development and hype-driven development. And when it comes to vote, we calculate only number of arguments, not number of bodies that has voted. And we support prove me wrong attitude. That means whoever can make a bold statement and ask to evaluate the idea. That's what basically just happened to you guys. That's it. I was short. Thank you. Do you guys have questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned that the backbone hasn't scaled. What do you mean specifically?
Well, we had like hundreds of use controllers, and it just sometimes hard to find a place where you just mutated your state. And well, basically, we made mistakes when we were just introducing backbone. As I said, once we mutated an event, so we end up having listeners with priorities, which is dead end for you. And overall, yeah, backbone. I mean, MVC structures, from my experience, play well at certain scale. Like, I don't know, 100 of controllers might be okay. If you have 1,000, like we had, it might be a little bit tricky to manage them.
So from the developer's point of view, not from performance?
Yes, from developers,
Okay.
not performance. Okay. Thank you.